Shalom, welcome back. Now we're going to be doing lesson number 3. Here in lesson number 3 we're going to be focusing on understanding more about our verbs, and we're going to be talking about many aspects of what we're going to be looking at as to define how to find verb problems. And we'll start with this one. This is a perfect example here. Here, if we look at this verb, we see here, we start first with, once again, our vav conversive, which leads us over here to our pronoun. So now, with the pronoun, which we already know is the he masculine singular form, that leaves us with 2 root letters, lamed and chaf sofit. So, where's the root? So I want to teach you a little rule about how to find roots when you don't know what root it is that's missing. Okay? So we kind of have a list of roots that we'd be looking for. Number 1, we're going to look for the root that is the nun in the first place. Okay? So the root that has the nun in the front, we're going to say maybe this root was the root that's missing with relationship to this missing root. The next one is we're going to maybe assume that maybe a yud is the middle root letter, because this is also something that predominantly happens when we're looking at roots, is that middle root letters tend to disappear. So this is going to be the other factor by which we will look at. Let me erase this here to give us more room. So another thing too is we can look for the lamed and the vav, chaf sofit. Alright, and so here we have the nun. We're looking for a yud, or maybe looking for a vav. And if we go here also, we can double the root letter, by which here we're looking for a geminate root. A geminate root is a root that literally has 2 roots that are the exact same letter, and this is what we would do looking for that. You also have the possibility that you have a hey that's missing, so now we can go to lamed, kaf, and hey, and here we're saying maybe the hey is the missing root, and this is going to be your main outlook at how you would try to find what is the root when you have 2 root letters. However, in this case, we're going to learn something that's going to be kind of special with relationship to this root, is the fact that it's the actual hey in the first position that's missing. And this is going to make it hey lamed chaf sofit, which is the root halach. Halach, he went. Okay? Now, one of the other indications we can look for when we're looking for roots is the fact that here, the tzarei is an indication that the root is at the beginning of the actual verb. And so if you see a tzarei, more than likely the root letter missing is the one that belongs in the front of the actual 3-letter root. However, this is a great way to actually go about searching for what root it possibly could be. And why this is an awesome route to go about is because this teaches you all of the possible eliminational aspects that you might be looking for to find roots. And if you didn't even know that this was a hey root, in which we're learning here this is, you basically would sit there and say, well, none of these roots make sense in relationship to what this verb is saying. And therefore, we learn the special rule here that it's the hey that's missing. But here in this case, hey typically we don't find dropping off. We don't find it also in the front of verbs for the most part. Okay, hey's not a very common root that's used with relationship to verbs. It's used, it's just not as large as used as you would find in relation to other letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And so therefore we have to at least know them and understand them and see what they are and how they function and work. Okay, so here we have, like I said, we have 5 possibilities by which we can use. We can look for a nun in the front of the root. We can look for a yud in the middle. We can look for a vav in the middle. We can look for a kaf and double it, so it's 2 kafs, because we're saying that possibly the double root is being used, because when we put it in this form, which is the vav conversive form, the kaf falls off. This is why we're looking for that. The same thing with regard to the vav. The vav would fall off, the nun would fall off, and the yud would fall off in the vav conversive form. And then of course lastly, the hey at the end, because also hey verbs, they drop off when we put them in the vav conversive. So here in this case, the root is hey lamed haf sofit, which is halach. And that is going to be the root that we're looking for. And what does halach mean? Halach means he went. Okay? Now something I want to teach you so that you can kind of get this in your head and get an understanding of this real quickly is, what is a vav conversive? Let's really go down to the beginning of what we did in lesson number 1. In lesson number 1, we saw the vav conversive. This is the first time we were introduced to the vav conversive. In this lesson, we're going to define the vav conversive as really the narrative form. So what does that mean? That means normally when we're dealing with the narration issue of a written text, the vav conversive is going to be the predominant form that we are going to be using and seeing and understanding. However, could I use the vav conversive in a transform it in a completely different way, by which the vav conversive form here can say the same thing in another form where the vav conversive is not being used? And absolutely, yes, you can. And what is that case? If I was to put, for example, the pronoun who, which who equivalates to the yud, which is the pronoun he, and I was to write the word amar. This is exactly the equivalence to vayomer. Okay? So if you wanted to start practicing writing sentences without the vav conversive, all you have to do is find out what the actual pronoun is. If the pronoun is masculine, use the masculine pronoun. If the pronoun is feminine, use the feminine pronoun. Now, this is going to only be utilized when we're dealing with the third person. Okay? So when we're dealing with the third person, this is what we're looking for. If we get into second person, or if we get into the first person, you don't need the pronoun. Okay? The pronoun is attached to the verb itself. Okay? So we know that only the third person, whether it's plural or whether it's singular, these are the only ones where we're definitely going to see a predominance of the actual pronoun being utilized. So if I wanted to, for example, utilize vayomer and write it out and just start writing some simple sentences using vayomer, but instead of using the narrative form, which narrative forms, I want you to understand, are probably the most trickiest forms of all of the verb forms we have in Biblical Hebrew. And that's because, well, narrative verb forms don't have a special verb chart. There actually is no specific verb chart in how you go through every single verb and vocalize it like you would with the past, with the present, with the future. Where in the verb narrative form, it's a little more on the tricky side, and you got to have a little more higher understanding of grammar and how vowelization is utilized. So in order to bypass that, okay, you can immediately just start writing all of your sentences as hu amar. And you know the vav conversive is just the narrative form. That in itself will save you so much trouble. And you'll just realize the fact that hu amar is the same thing as saying vayomer. Because why? The vav conversive is changing the verb that is future into the past. And since we're using the past tense verb here, voila, we have the actual form as is needed. Okay? So that's one thing we definitely have to understand and utilize. Now, another thing we need to go is remember the fact that David, which is our proper noun, so we got to remember that the proper nouns, all right, proper nouns, when we're dealing with proper nouns, remember proper nouns, typically when we see it after a vav conversive, is the subject of the verb. And the only way to prove it is just go back here and ask, what is this? If this is third person, and you find that this noun over here is the third person, voila, there you go, now you got the subject of the verb. So here we have the subject of our verb. Alright? So David is the one who is doing the action. So now I say, David, vayelech David, David went. And now we have our first important grammatical issue here, by which we're taking that inseparable preposition. Remember, we learned that mem has a mean, which is a separable preposition. However, when mean is utilized with other things, such as adverbs or such as indefinite nouns or such as definite nouns with pronoun endings, mean drops off the nun and becomes mem. Okay? So this is the ma or me or possibly me is what you have left when you're going to attach it. And then of course the next thing is we're going to attach it here to our adverb, sham, okay? So sham is going to be attached to mean. And the way we do this is we're signifying that the nun has been assimilated with the actual word, and by doing so, this is what we use the dagesh. This dagesh is called the dagesh lanei. What is a dagesh lanei? It basically means that this dagesh is signifying that something has been attached to something else. It doesn't change the vocalization of the word, whereas the dagesh forte does, okay? And we'll learn about that in a second here. So here we're going to talk about the fact of misham, is we're saying sham and mean is being connected together. So here we say me, put the word sham, and we're putting our dagesh lanei in the next letter of what mean is connected to, which tells me that I have an assimilation going on here, that this is actually two words. And that word is going to be mean and sham that have been put together. And so therefore I know that mean means from, and sham means there. Alright? So misham means from there. So I know that vayelech David and David went misham, from there. Okay? So I have to know and memorize the fact that mean, although it is a separate preposition, it's a separable preposition, by itself it can stand as a word, many of times can be attached to other elements. And that's only going to be determined based upon the fact of how am I going to identify that it's being attached. Well, that's why I said look for the dagesh that's going to be used. This dagesh is called a dagesh lanei. It is not a dagesh forte. We're going to talk about dagesh forte in a second here. And this dagesh lanei is signifying that there's been an assimilation of two different words, and they're being squished together to create one fluid statement. Okay? And so misham is literally from, and sham is there, so you get misham from there, and now you have this one fluid statement. Okay? So what is a Dagesh forte? All right? A Dagesh forte is a Dagesh that literally changes the sound of a word by which it is placed in. And there's only a few of these that actually take place. Okay? We have, for example, bet. Bet, if I take away the Dagesh, is a V sound. So it's vet. We have pay. Pay, if I take away the Dagesh, now it becomes a F sound, as in fey. And this here, as we're looking at this, okay, describes what we call the Dagesh forte. So, Dagesh forte. Alright, what does it mean? This means a hard Dagesh. It means that it's a dot that causes the change of the sound of the letter rather than the dot that doesn't have any effect. Okay? So, we have to remember these different things and to know the fact that when we see this Dagesh taking place, that this Dagesh, as we see it, is going to change the sound. What's the next one we're going to look at? We're going to look at Kaf versus Chaf. Okay? So we have basically 3 letters we have to memorize by which when the Dagesh is placed or when the Dagesh is taken away, we're going to see a harshness of sound take place when it's taken away. We go from ba to v. We go from pa to fa. We go from ka to cha. Okay? And that is what's going to cause that harshness of sound. If we see a Dagesh in any other letter, you have to understand this, nothing is affected. There's no sound change. There's no vocalization change. These are the only 3 that absolutely get affected because of the fact that if they have the Dagesh, it makes the sound of what it means. Ba, pa, ka. Without the Dagesh, va, fa, cha. Alright? So that's what the Dagesh forte. Dagesh forte tells me, alright, that something's happening and it's changing the sound. Okay? Here, in this Dagesh, what we see here in the Yud is called a Dagesh forte. Why? Because it's changing the sound by which we see Vayelech. Vayelech. Vayelech, and almost like as if it's doubling the sound. It's not so apparent because when you're saying it quickly, you don't really tend to hear the sound, but if you actually said it a lot more slower, you'd find yourself realizing that there is a doubling of the sound. Whereas in David hears the Dagesh, but there's no effect to the actual letter. The da doesn't change any. Like if I took the da out of it, it doesn't change da to some other sound. It has the same sound. Okay? Where the Dagesh here tells me that something's been assimilated to the actual adverb, and therefore now we have a complete change of what has been put together is a combination of 2 different words, mean, like we said, and sham, and when we squish them together, we get that assimilation that takes place. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, lesson number 3. As we continue on, we go to lesson 4, where we go into more depths and more issues and more compacted problems as we learn to break apart and understand Hebrew and make it as simple as possible so that you can realize you can learn the language. It's not that hard to learn to read and write in Hebrew. Speaking may be a little different, but learning to read and write is definitely something that is definitely plausible and easy to do. We'll see you around.